The track is doing really well on Beatport at the moment, which is super exciting. In fact, today it just cracked the top 10. Hey guys, it's Dilby here. We're in my studio in Berlin. Welcome back to the channel. I'm super excited for today's video. I've got a new EP out at the moment on Gorge Nick Curly's label 8-Bit Records, and I'm going to do a walkthrough of one of the tracks. I did a few polls on my Instagram stories to find out which track people wanted me to do a walkthrough of, and the results are in. It's No More Love. The track is doing really well on Beatport at the moment, which is super exciting. In fact, today it just cracked the top 10. Yeah! So I'm going to open up the project, walk you through it, and show you what makes it tick. I'm super grateful for all the support on this release. All 3 tracks are climbing up the top 100, which is an amazing result. If you enjoy the videos on the channel and want to help support and give something back, then I'll leave the links to this release in the description below. Grab one of the tracks on Beatport. It's only a couple of bucks, but it really helps. So let's run it up and see what we can do. Anyway, enough of that, let's get stuck into this video. Alright guys, here we are inside Ableton, the project for No More Love. So this is something that I did in January this year, I believe. Anyone who's watched some of my previous videos will be familiar with the template. I will link it up here. I've got a video that talks you through the whole thing, gives you kind of the justification of how and why I do things and lay things out the way I do. So check that out after watching this full video. So what I'm going to do in this track walkthrough, I'm going to try and talk you through the process of how I have come up with the idea and how I go about actually creating it. The kind of sequence of steps that I go through to get an end result. I try to have a pretty structured way of working that helps me to do things quickly and get results quickly. I definitely deviate from the plan when I need to, but I try to keep my workflow pretty structured and pretty focused so that I can just get things done quickly. So I always start with like a basic foundation, some basic drums. But in the last year or so, I've started to keep the drums much more simple in the idea generation phase, as I basically want to come up with a theme or like a melody or whatever for the track. And I don't want that to be too influenced by a bunch of percussion going on. I find it much easier to come up with a hook and then add percussion around that than create like a full beat and drum groove and then try and find some melodic elements that fit around that. Here we've got a kick. And this is being made up of 2 layers. I don't remember exactly, but what often happens is I've got a kick that I use in a lot of tracks, which I start off with in my template. But at some point I might decide that that kick's not working, so I'll find something else. I've sampled this kick from somewhere. I've got a video showing you how to do that, so I'm going to link it up and you can check that out. Super simple, super easy, but really effective because you're getting a sound source that you know works. It's quite a beefy, decent length sample. And then this one is also sampled and it's just adding a bit more knock on top. So I've EQ'd out the low end. So together they give the kick like a nice solid low end with a kind of crunchy transient that's going to punch through the mix. So I've got this rack that I use in every track. It's part of my template and I just use that to automate a filter which cuts out the low frequencies of the kick. Then I use a different coloured MIDI clip so I can quickly identify visually when that's happening in the track. You know, having a colour coding system, making sure everything's named, it just really saves me time from having to figure out what's going on. Now, claps. I've got 3 claps being layered here. So this one is from a loop. And it's got like a bit of a pre-sound here, I guess. It kind of sucks into the sound, I think. And then we've got this clap. Which is just a bit brighter, so together they make kind of like a punch with some brightness on top. And then this one is only playing on every second clap. And this is a bit more of a percussive sound. But the interesting thing with this sound in the mix, it actually almost sounds like a breath or something, like someone's going on every second clap. So those claps are all being grouped together. I'm compressing them a little bit, cutting out the low frequencies and just boosting a little bit around this kind of fundamental area. I guess that's around 3K, just to give a little bit of punch through the mix. And just adding a bit of reverb here. Now I've got a snare fill. Now I've got this shaker hat. And we've got an open hat here. So I'm just EQing out a few little harsh frequencies on that. Shaker hat, I'm just EQing out the very top, and that's being ducked with this compressor when the open hat plays. So that's a subtle mixing technique, but it just stops the volume getting too out of control when there's too many hi-hats playing on top of each other. Then I've got this open hat groove. So that's just playing some little one-off hits that are panned hard to the left. So this is the type of thing that I would basically start generating ideas from. I'll often go first to a bass line, so let's have a look at that bass. So you can see here in the MIDI clip, there's just some different notes turned on and off. That's me just trying different things. So if I go over to clip view, you can see here like a bunch of different ideas that I've tried. So then finally I've ended up deciding that this is the one to go with. As you can hear, not all those ideas are good. My process is basically just to keep trying things until I come up with something that catches my ear and I like, and then move forward. So the track is frozen to because of CPU usage from screen recording, but let's unfreeze it and have a look what's going on here. So it's coming from Trillion. I really like Trillion. I use it a lot. What I really like about it is the way that they kind of map the most important parameters for the sound here, so it's easy to tweak. There's like heat, for example. I'm assuming that's some saturation. Wiggle, some LFO. Glide. So that's just like portamento between the notes. Detune. So that's just adding some unison. We've got FM. Then filter controls here. A lot of the time what I'll end up doing is finding a preset from Trillion and then just tweaking the basic settings until it sounds about right. I've got a little compression going on here, some sidechain from the LFO tool, and of course my trusty low cut rack. So on kick and bass, where I use this low cut rack to automate out the low end, I'll always give it a different color so that I can quickly see what's going on in the arrangement. Also really key for keeping track of the arrangement are these markers. I've just kind of marked them out, but they help me to quickly identify, you know, when I'm working down here in the vocals or something and you can't see any of this stuff. I can still see the markers, so I know where the drop is and where the breaks are, all that kind of thing. So from there we've got a basic groove going. Now from there I would go to work on a melodic idea. So in this case the bass line's slightly melodic, so what I've done is just basically used that bass line MIDI and created a riff from that. So it just really reinforces that same theme. So we're playing a preset from Omnisphere, Analog 80s hit plucks. Sounds good. So without all this MIDI stuff, let's turn off this processing too. Well, that sounds boring, doesn't it? Okay, so add on the MIDI devices. So you can see how playing that 7th note just adds so much more rich harmonics to the sound. But because it's playing the same notes as the bass, it still sounds really good together. And there's just a little bit of variation in the riff. So at the start it's really reinforcing the melody, and then it's creating a bit of interplay between the two elements at the end. Then I've got some saturation from Decapitator. That just grits up the sound a bit, makes it sound a bit more beefy. So I've got a glue compressor there, and what that's doing, you can see that the filter cutoff is being automated here. So that glue compressor is really just to keep the volume in check in those places where the cutoff's opening up. I've got some chorus. So that just helps to spread it out, make it sound a bit bigger. Got an EQ cutting out some low end. I've got another delay, which is just adding some 8th note like rhythmic taps that kind of help. It's more of like a sound design thing. It just helps the stab sit with the groove of the track. Now this delay here, this H delay, is kind of creating a bit of a moment in the track. So you can see I've recorded some automation there that is automating the delay speed, and then I'm also increasing the feedback so the delay is lasting longer, and then I'm also automating the dry wet. So that basically builds up into the break here to create tension, and then it gets all crazy through here. I'm cutting out a little bit of the high end because there's a lot of other things that are coming in the break, so I don't want it to get too crowded. But this creates like this quite unique sound that is a bit chaotic, kind of creates a lot of tension, and because it's based on one of the main sounds in the track, so it doesn't sound out of place. So everything up to now is basically the foundation of the track. This is what the track is about, and everything else is just kind of adding to kind of help create tension and release, create little moments in the track. But this is the foundation, this is what it's about, right? That's the hook or the theme of the track. And the job of all the other elements is to basically make that not boring when you play it over 6 or 7 minutes. So we've got some other percussive elements in here. So what I'm doing here with this loop is I'm automating this EQ to just open up the high frequency in some of the hits, right? And I think I just wanted the top of that to add a bit of texture. So with the EQ, you can see here I'm automating the high cut, and that's just helping this kind of loop. It's helping that loop to become something that complements the track rather than kind of overpowers it, right? And we've got this here, which I've called Tom Groove. Right, so I'm just automating, cutting out some parts of this loop that I don't want. So basically what I want is that low end. I could use a tom drum sound and just have programmed that myself, but I like the way that it's got a bit of extra texture on that. Adds a little bit of depth to the background, but it's not like a kind of main element, it's just adding a bit of groove in there. Now I've got another one here called Boom Hit. Right, a bomb hit, and it sounds like someone going bomb, bomb, which I guess is why I've called it that. Yeah, so it's only like playing a little bit of this loop. Yeah, so I'm just using one little sound from that loop that I liked. I've got a top loop here. And I'm just cutting out the clap. I didn't want that clap. I just wanted the hats so that it'll just sit under the hat groove that I've created. Add in some groove, and then I've got a shaker loop here too. So that's how the groove is built up on this one. Nice and simple, nothing too complicated, as there's quite a few like melodic elements, and if there's too much going on in the drums then they'll get overshadowed and the mix is just going to get muddied up. We've got an up. So there's the MIDI for that. So that's coming from Diva, and I'm automating a bunch of stuff here. I'm also sending it to a huge reverb here and a big delay here. So that's just when it's coming out of the break. So that just helps to create that wash and transition out of the break. Let's unfreeze it and we'll have a look at the automation. So yeah, opening up the cutoff and the break there. A bit more automation on the envelope amount. And then sustain to open up in the break. And attack. So what that attack is doing is, because it's quite a plucky sound, it's opening up so it becomes more sustained and more washy as it goes through the break. When this comes out, it becomes more plucky again. So I've got a pad here, and I'm playing that over 2 octaves to give it a bit more harmonics. So together that just kind of sounds bright, but also has a bit more depth and body to it. And that filter is just being opened up at the end of these breaks to transition out of the break and into the drop. Filter is basically just helping to transfer energy up and down throughout the track. Now, this element here, this using something, is basically I do this a lot. So I'll be working on another track, I'll come up with an idea and it doesn't work for the track, but I'm like, this is good, I can use this in something. So, you know, I've got like millions of post-it notes bloody everywhere. I've got drawers full of them with little ideas. All my tracks have got things like this, a MIDI track that's got an element on it that's turned off, but it says use this in something. Well, this is a cool riff. So when I come to working on new material, I've got this backlog of ideas that if I kind of get to a creative block, I've always got something to pull from. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Like, it can be quite difficult to come up with inspiration on demand, but as a creative, you're always creating, right? So when that creativity strikes, it's important to kind of harness that and save it for the moment when you need it. Okay, high string, cool. So I'm just automating that up in volume. in the breaks, and I've got a bit of chorus on there, bit of LFO tool, and this sample is coming from my Roland JV1010. Maybe need to see about getting that fixed. He's not a happy synth at the moment. What's this? Hairbrush Purple Rain. Okay, so this is like a texture from Omnisphere that I've recorded to audio. So I'm not sure exactly what I did, but I imagine I probably played like, used the MIDI from the ARP or something like that, or the main riff, and then played this texture, recorded it down just to save on processing, and I'm just using that to add some texture coming into the breaks. It's pretty subtle in the mix, but let's take a listen like here. So it's really subtle. You almost, like when it's on, you kind of struggle to hear it in the background. But when you turn it off, it just feels like there's a little bit of depth missing from the track. So elements like that for me are really key. Like they're not integral to the track, but they're kind of integral to the depth of the track. They help to take a track that's built up from quite basic elements and make it sound a lot bigger than it is. This bell texture is something similar. So that's come from a sample pack, and I'm using Tantra to add some kind of glitchy sounds to that. Without the Tantra, so the Tantra just makes it kind of more rhythmic and kind of adds some kind of weird spiky sounds to it. A really cool plugin, I love that one. So we'll do the same thing, play it in the track. So this one's even more subtle than the hairbrush. The reason this is called hairbrush is that's the name of the preset from Omnisphere. It's not my wacky creative naming. This is even more subtle than the hairbrush sample. It just adds these like interesting little sparkly sounds that happen in the sides of the stereo frequency, and it just kind of, again, adds some depth or some little magic to the track, you know. So this is part of a larger sample, and I've just taken like a little bit of it that I felt added a little something to the track. It's quite subtle in the mix. So it's really just like a background ear candy kind of thing, but it's you know, using these little details to add a bit more depth to the track. I think is a really important aspect to production. So we've got this chord, which is a similar thing. So what I've done here is add on an Ableton resonator, a decapitator to crunch up the sound a bit, cut out the lows, added on some delay, and sidechained it. Let's take off these, and you can kind of hear what the raw sound is like. So it goes from being a bit kind of boomy to a bit more atmospheric. So a lot of these sounds are being used as elements in the groove, or just to kind of highlight the end of 8 bars or something like that. Similar to like an effects sound, a crash or whatever, but just maybe a bit more interesting. We've got this growl synth. Which is also taken from a loop, just using a piece of that, and that's just being used to kind of add some drama into some of the breaks. Now I just realized I forgot to actually show you what's going on with this twinkle, I've called it. Use in something, unfreeze it. It's just a sequence called Astral Cascades being played from Repro 1, and I'm cutting out all of the lows. I'm adding in some delay and some stereo enhancement and some overdrive. So let's play it without them. So that actually, when I put that EQ on, it starts to sound quite thin, but I'll show you with the overdrive, it really kind of brings it up. So that's pushing it out to the sides more, making it kind of bigger because it's only happening in these breaks. So what I want to happen in these breaks is that the frequency kind of comes up a bit and the sounds get a bit wider. And that creates like a bit of drama when it drops and all those highs get cut away and it becomes a bit more narrow focused and the beat comes back in, the low end comes back in, and it's kind of back to the groove. Now if I turn on this overdrive, it's really going to kind of pump it up. It adds a lot of volume, but it also adds like a lot of crispy intensity to the sound. This is also being sent to a big reverb, so there's this that makes it quite washy because it's happening in these breaks. It doesn't really matter. If this was happening across the beat, it wouldn't really work. It's too kind of intense and distracts too much from the groove, I think. But in the context of how it's being used, it helps to create a moment in the track where everything kind of gets a bit chaotic, a bit sparkly and wide, and then comes back in, like I was saying. Let's have a listen. So you can see how that kind of creates some real contrast between what's happening in the break and then what's happening at the drop. So moving on to the vocals, in this track I purposefully wanted to avoid using a vocal hook, as I kind of tend to do that in a lot of tracks, and I think it's important to step outside of your norms or your comfort zone, challenge yourself a little bit and do things differently from time to time. So I wanted to do something that was a bit more melodic and a bit more stripped back. I've sectioned this off into new Vox. I'll turn that off and explain that in a second. Vox glitch 1. Transistor. So that's just a little phrase from a sample pack, and I've got Tantra on it again. Transistor. Again, you know, really in the background there, it's kind of just a little textural thing. It's not kind of saying, hey, look at me. It's just something small that happens a few times throughout the track. Now we've got vocal glitch 2. Also with Tantra on it, using a different preset. This is called Sequence Robotic, Sequence Pitching. It's such a good plugin, this one. It really just kind of helps to create these little textures, and there's this interesting little stuff. There's a few other plugins that do a similar thing, like D-Blue Glitch, Effectrix, Stutter Edit, all kind of variations on that kind of glitching type of thing. But it's really, I think it's really handy to have one of those in your arsenal. I've got this So I'm just using the start of a longer sample. And again, like these melodic elements here, it's just being used to kind of augment the end of a bar. So with all of these things going, it just kind of helps to keep things interesting and keep things moving along. So they're kind of like, over a longer period of time, kind of calling and responding to each other. Then I've got this Vox reverse. So it looks like that's just a sound out of a sample pack that's in the right key, and it's just a vocal phrase being recorded with a lot of reverb and some effects on it and reversed. So that just works like a transition effect basically. Now I'm going to show you the new Vox thing last because that's the order in which it happened in the track. So we've got this dub clap. So that's just a snare being sent through a reverb and a delay. And I'm just using that in the same way that you would use a crash in a track. Got this vinyl crackle. Again, just adding a little subtle texture in the background. Noise down, that is simple white noise, and that's just coming. And that's just adding some kind of intensity as it comes out of the break here. And I've got a riser. Pretty standard stuff, to be honest. I've got a snare riser. So I've just got a pattern building up here. And that's being sent to some reverb. And what I'm doing is I'm introducing the low end of the sound. So this snare, I think, has quite a bit of low end in it. So it's starting off as just the high frequencies and then slowly getting deeper and deeper, and the volume is coming up as it gets to the drop. So I thought worth pointing out there was the random pan I've got in there. So that's just shifting a little bit in the stereo spectrum, and it just kind of helps it to sound a little bit more organic or something. It's not always just going in the same place, it's kind of moving around a little bit, so it helps to add a bit of movement into the sound. So that is pretty much everything, and that is how I sent it to Gorge and Nick Curly as a demo, which they liked and wanted to sign, but Gorge came back to me and said, like, maybe it would be better with a little vocal sound to give it a bit more identity. I was a little bit hesitant at first because I'd kind of made a point to myself of writing a track without a vocal, but then we discussed the idea and I understood what he meant, and it was basically more of just a vocal texture, just a little affected sound that adds another dimension to the track. So what we've got here is just a tiny little sample that's being delayed. I've used the same sample and I've created like a delay of a tiny part of this sample that kind of leads into the main sample. So it just kind of, without it, it sounds a little bit less interesting. And then I've also done this reverse reverb trick where I basically have taken this, I've reversed it, I've put a reverb on it, I've frozen it or recorded it, brought it back down, and then I have reversed it again. So it sounds like it's sucking into itself. Let me take off the effects and stuff on here, which are all just a series of reverbs and delays. So it just kind of sounds like that's sucking into the sample. So and then we've got this other bit here which is just happening on the drop, which is another just like little vocal nothing, but it just adds a little bit of texture and just accentuates the drop a little bit after this sample. So it kind of, all those things like work together to create like a kind of sequence that is bigger than the sum of its parts, I guess. Guys, hopefully you enjoyed that and it was interesting and informative for you. As you can see from that, a track doesn't need to be overly complicated in order to work and perform well. The key is to build a solid foundation and a strong, compelling theme. After that, it's about adding a few key elements that help to support and enhance the theme and bring the track to the next level. It's not rocket science, and simple is often better. It's really important, in my opinion, that you don't overthink things too much when you're writing. Don't forget, the link is in the description if you want to help support the channel and buy a copy of one of the tracks from Beatport. And that's about it. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTuber stuff. Feel free to reach out on Instagram. It's @DilbyDJ. My inbox is always open for you guys, so I'll see you in the DMs. Catch you next time. Peace.